Um, there we go. All right. So, let me just put my clock on here so I don't talk too much because I could probably talk a lot longer than people would like. So, why 1904? And the reason 1904 is because it's the first great Red Sox Yankees pennant race, even though those teams aren't really called those teams yet. On the front page here, the first slide, that's Happy Jack Chesborough. I think he was called Happy because it's like you call a bald guy curly. He wasn't really a very happy guy, but that was his nickname. Baseball in 1904 would look a lot like it does now. You'd know what the game was when you watched it. There's two major leagues, the AL and the NL. There's a series of minor leagues. The highest classification is double A. Four balls for a walk, three strikes, you're out. The pitching distance has been stabilized for 10 years, 60 feet, 6 inches. And now the foul strike rule is a couple years old. So a guy like Willie Keeler can't sit there and foul off like 15 pitches without getting any strikes until he wears out the pitcher to get a hit. So the game was very offensive tilted in the 1890s, and now this is the beginning of the dead ball era where things are tilting back toward the pitcher. Things that were different, though, no farm systems. The minors are all independent. There is a sort of draft where you can draft players for a certain price. You can option players to minor league teams, but you do it at your own risk. There could be new management coming in, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, sorry, that was the last guy that made that deal. We're selling this guy somewhere else." Obviously, as I think we all know, there is no integration. There are no players of color. Black baseball operates sort of on a challenge system where teams barnstorm around and they challenge whoever holds the championship at the time, kind of like white baseball was before 1870. The Negro leagues are still waiting until after World War One. The ballparks are wooden. They're very poorly constructed. They have immense outfield distances. It's very hard to hit a ball over the fence. You can have a guy like Tommy Leach, who leads the league with 6 home runs one year, and probably five of those are inside the park home runs. So it's a different game in that respect. Kicking off here in spring training in 1889, only one team went to spring training, and that was the Philadelphia Phillies, and they went down to Georgia. The White Sox had been the first, or the White Stockings, actually. Chicago, the forerunners of the Cubs, had been the first team to actually use the kind of spring training in the mid 1880s. But by 1904, everybody went to spring training except the Washington Senators, and the Senators were a disaster. They had terrible ownership. The league was trying to find someone else to buy them. They had no money, so they stayed in the DC area to train. But everybody else went to different places. But it was very haphazard. It would be like, for example, the owner would know somebody who knew somebody. He's like, hey, you should come here to San Antonio. It's a great place. I've got a hotel. I've got a great field for you. And teams would be like, okay, we're going without doing any type of advanced scouting. And this would lead to some type of issue. This lead to fails like we're about to see in a second. Um, Teams would play in these remote areas and they'd barnstorm their way back north. So the Red Sox were in Macon, or the Boston Americans were in Macon, the Giants were in Savannah, the Tigers were in Shreveport, for example. The Cleveland Blues, which then were known as the Naps, which then are known as the Indians and now are the Guardians, they went to San Antonio because it was supposed to be a really nice place, and they were a team on the rise. They had Napoleon Lajoie, who see a picture of there, probably the best all-around player in baseball. Um, they're a projected contender. They'd finished third in 1903. They had some really good players. They're a team of stars, basically. Um, Unfortunately for them, things didn't go well in San Antonio. It started, the newspapers said all the right things at first, and then you found out, it's a really crappy ballpark. The infield's terrible. There's no place for showers. The weather gets bad, gets too hot, gets too cold, rains all the time. Guys start hurting their arms. Wives start getting ill. And to make matters worse, they play the local St. Louis College and they actually have a triple play turned against them. They never really recover from the spring training and they finish a distant fourth in the race, although they do contend for a little bit. When the season starts in the National League, the Pittsburgh Pirates are the three-time defending National League champions. They're going for a four-peat. In 1902, the Pirates are so good they finished almost 27 games ahead of everybody else in the National League, ahead of the second place team. But over the years, what's happened is their pitching staff has kind of atrophied and fallen apart. Jack Chesbrough, who's on the front page, jumped to the American League. Sam Lever and Deacon Philippe both hurt their arms. Philippe because he tried to pitch almost every game of the 1903 World Series. And then poor Ed Doheny, who was really solid third or fourth starter for them, he's had a mental breakdown. He had mental illness in the fall of 1903. He missed the World Series. He was committed to an asylum in 1904. Things got so bad in Exhibition Park. That's a picture of Exhibition Park. It was down by the river. It would flood if the weather was too bad. The smoke would come from the smoky city. All the steel mills and stuff would come down on the field. It had a section for gamblers, just like every park did back then. The gamblers were not happy because the Pirates started out and they went in the tank right away and they never got out of it. So there were issues with the gamblers getting on the players, giving Honus Wagner, who is probably the second best player, if not the best. He's right up there with Lajoie, all-around player in the best player in the National League. They're giving Wagner a hard time. The Pirate owner Barney Dreyfuss would keep throughout the year. There'd be him wagering people. We're going to turn it around. Bet me money. Trying to bet the owner of the Reds. Trying to bet other people. With all this gambling, it's pretty obvious how 1919 eventually came about. This isn't like the mayor of Boston, wagers a bunch of clams against Rocky Mountain oysters or something. These are guys really betting money that were in charge of these teams. The Pirates were never in the race, and they finished fourth, but they were 19 games behind the Giants. Bad boys throughout the year. There were some people that didn't behave quite as well. The Brooklyn team was a tail ender. I think they finished sixth. They had some issues throughout the year, and this guy Ned Garvin was part of them. Brooklyn trashed the Monongahela Hotel in their first Western trip in Pittsburgh. They behaved so badly that when the Reds showed up there, the next baseball team to play there, they were basically told, if you step out of line, we're going to kick you out and we'll never have another baseball team in here again. Garvin was a pitcher. He got sent home from that trip after being badly cut up and robbed in a fight, probably because alcohol was likely involved, like it was with a lot of guys back then. Then later in the year, the Superbas were going, or they're called the Superbas then instead of the Dodgers. They were going nowhere, but they were on a long Western trip all the way to St. Louis, which is as far west as you could get in those days. The manager, Ned Hanlon, was gone. He was off scouting. So the team was in charge of the traveling secretary. And there was a drunken rampage on the train where Garvin ended up slugging the club secretary. Garvin eventually gets released and he gets picked up by the New York Highlanders, which are the Yankees before they're called the Yankees for the stretch run, although he really doesn't contribute to them. Clark Griffith, the Yankees manager, picks him up. Griffith's a Hall of Famer, probably better known as eventually being the owner of the Washington Senators, but he was a Hall of Famer both as a really great pitcher in the 1890s for the Chicago National League team, and he jumped to the AL, won the first AL pennant with the White Sox, and then he was the lucky guy who got to run the first AL team when the Yankees came into New York. He was still pretty solid in 1903, but in 1904 in Philadelphia, photographer gets too close, and it's a really large camera and stuff. And I guess he got in Griffith's face, and Griffith slugged him. Griffith made the mistake of punching him with his pitching hand instead of his, non-pitching hand, and Griffith breaks his hand, and suddenly he only wins half the games he did the year before, which was going to be a problem for New York coming down the stretch. So some of the top performances, there's a picture of Cy Young. Cy Young is like a John Kruk, doesn't look like an athlete kind of guy, but he did win more games than anybody else in Major League history. The Boston Americans, who became the Red Sox, the defending champions. Cy Young threw the first ever perfect game in AL history in May 1904 against the Philadelphia Athletics. Incidentally, against Rube Waddle, who's also a Hall of Famer, who had the strikeout record for years until Nolan Ryan broke it in the early 70s. Guy named Jesse Tannehill was roughly their third starter. Tannehill threw a no-hitter down the stretch in Chicago. What's also notable about that is Tannehill's brother, Lee, played for the White Sox. He was an infielder, and he was a regular player. So they're both brothers that played in the majors. The Yankees were called either the Highlanders or the Americans or the Greater New Yorks or the Invaders, whatever newspaper you wanted, but they're mostly called the Highlanders. That's Jack Chisborough. He has one of the greatest seasons a pitcher will ever have. 41-12, 1.82 earned run average. Pitched probably around 450 innings. He puts a lot of wear and tear in his arm, throwing the spitball, one of the first spitballers. The Giants win the National League pretty easily. Well, they have two Hall of Fame. They don't have one 30-game winner. They've got two 30-game winners for both Hall of Famers, veteran Joe McGinnity and a young Christy Mathewson. Cleveland, although they don't finish high in the race, they have Lajoie has a pretty nice stat slash line there, 200 ops plus, and then Honus Wagner for Pittsburgh has 188 ops plus. So those are the two best players in the league, although both their teams finished fourth. So the Battle of New York, it was a big deal getting an American League team in New York. The Giants fought tooth and nail. They used their Tammany connections every time the Yankees would try or the American League would try to buy land for a ballpark, they cut a street through it. But eventually there was a peace agreement. And There's a peace agreement. So then the Highland. So then you had the Yankees starting in 1903, and there was a heated rivalry between the teams, even though they didn't play on the field. It went so far as Giants management refused to play in the World Series in 1904 because they were afraid they'd have to play the Yankees and they could possibly lose. It was the only World Series that wouldn't be played up until the strike year of 1994. Clark Griffith is here on the left. John McGraw, the Giants manager, is on the right. There were actually allegations the Giants were paying people to go up to Highland Hilltop Park and to boo the Highlanders and to give them a hard time during their games. So the American League race I was calling this the Great Race because this was a heck of a pennant race. These are the standings on August 19th. There are 5 teams within 4 games of first place in an 8-team league. Part of that is enabled by how god awful the Washington Senators are at the bottom there with a 286 winning percentage. But it's a really tight race compared to the National League where the Giants run away and they win the NL by 13 games. But Cleveland, Chicago, and Philadelphia, they all fall away, and it's the Yankees and the Red Sox down the stretch in October. And with 5 games left to play in the regular season, Boston leads the Yankees by 1 percentage point in half a game, and the teams are supposed to face each other the last 5 games, all in New York. So 5 games for the money. Only the trick is back in June, New York ownership decided they wanted to make a little money because they figured, hey, we're probably not going to be in it. They're a little bit behind in the race. And they rented out Hilltop Park to Columbia University's football team on that Saturday. And there's no Sunday ball in New York. So 2 of the games got moved to Boston. So now it's 1 in New York, train ride to Boston, 2 in Boston on Saturday, come back and play 2 in New York on Monday. So the Yankees win the first game. It's Chesbrough's 31st to take the lead. And then this is where the controversy kind of comes in. So they're getting on the train to Boston, and the story is that Clark Griffith tells Chesbrough, I'm not going to use you. You're not coming to Boston. I don't want to, you need to rest. I want you rested for Friday. And Chesbrough says, whatever, and grumbles about it. And then at Grand Central Station, as they're getting around the train, Chesbrough shows up on the platform. Griffin says, what are you doing here? And Chesbrough says, do you want to win? And then Griffin motions him onto the train. The next day, Chesbrough's not supposed to start, talks him into starting game 1. Players come and beg Griffith to start him in game 1. The Red Sox are gripping because Chesbrough's dominated them all year. He dominates them for the first 4 or 5 innings, and then the floodgates break. And the Red Sox hammer him the first game 13-2. They win the second game, a darkness shortened game, 1-0. Cy Young pitches that game. It's the sort of game where a guy like Lou Krieger, who is known for nothing other than being Cy Young's personal catcher, who bats rough around 180 or 200, dominated by throwing 3 or 4 Yankees out and totally controlling the game. It just shows what a different game the dead ball was. But at this point, everything is turned around, and now the Red Sox just need to win 1 game on Monday to win the pennant. Chesbrough starts the first game. It's sort of like the Bucky Dent game in a way, in that he takes a shutout into the 7th inning. The Red Sox tie it up at 2. And then the top of the 9th inning, with 2 outs and a runner on third, Chesbrough throws a spitball that goes over everybody's head to the wall, back to the grandstand for a wild pitch. And the Red Sox score, the Boston scores the run, wins the game 3-2, wins the pennant. For years after that, Chesbrough's wife tried to change that to a pass ball on catcher Red Kleinow. Clark Griffith, for years, tried to blame it on Kleinow. Chesbrough was also Griffith's pitching coach for a while in Washington, so who knows? But everything I've seen contemporaneously basically says that it was a wild pitch. And the one quote I did find from one of the Boston papers said the ball hit the stand on the fly. So the Giants still refuse to play Boston in the World Series. There's no World Series. They talk about maybe doing it in the spring, and they don't. But after that, there's such backlash on the Giants that owner John T. Brush comes up with the Brush rules for staging a World Series. And then, like I said, we have one every year until till the strike in 94. So last slide, just some Denver stuff that came up. I didn't do a whole lot looking at Denver, but so the Grizzlies were in the Class A Western League. They're sometimes called the Cubs by the Rocky Mountain News and some of the other papers. But there was a ban on rooting at Broadway Park by ownership, to the point where the Post was complaining that they saw police officers coming over to people and telling them to pipe down and stop rooting. And this may or may not be coincidentally, but the Grizzlies end up playing much better on the road this year, and they have a battle with the Colorado Springs Millionaires for first place. The teams go back and forth through June and July. In September, unfortunately for them, the Omaha team has a late charge, and they take the Western League pennant by 2 games in front of Denver and 2.5 in front of Colorado Springs. And that's what I've got. So I don't know if people have questions. I mean, I talk about this for days, and I know
Mhm.
my wife doesn't want me to. So, um, but yeah, that's
Jared,
those things I found.
is this an era that you know a lot about?
Yeah, I was. I mean, yeah, I'm on the dead ball. I mean, the Saber Committee dead ball. I've written some stuff for some like on the 1914 Braves book or the Federal League book. That combinations. I've got a couple stuff in there. So yeah, it was always an era I really, for some weird reason as a kid, really liked and just continued into adulthood.
And did you pick a year? Have you like studied a year at a time before, or did you just of this era, did you just think that a lot of things kind of overlapped in 1904?
It was because of the pennant race. I mean,
Okay.
every year's kind of got its weird stuff, but when both leagues are like 10 or 15 game spreads, it's not quite as interesting as when it goes down to the wire.
Yeah, definitely. I knew the story of the series not happening because you see the long ledger of World Series and see the missing one and look that up. But I had no idea about the pennant race going into that. That was cool to know and crazy they had to flip flop between the two cities. Joe, you got a question?
Yeah, Jared, great presentation. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't 1904 the year they moved this season from 140 games to 154?
Yeah, it was they had because it'd been 140 before and they moved it up to 154. So it was actually it was a longer season and it was harder because both the Boston and New York pitching staffs were just shot by the end of the year. Guys were throwing 300, 400 innings and guys gotten hurt. And really, each team only had really one or two dependable pitchers by the time they got to the very end. And the extra games didn't help.
So you may have already checked this, but if the season was still 140 games in 1904, who would have won the American League?
It would have been close. For the last 2 weeks, it was literally neck and neck for the Red Sox and the Boston and New York. So it just depends whoever's on top that day. The race was so close in August. There was like the Sporting News headline I loved was like one hit sent them from first to third because the White Sox were tightly in it then in August. And Sam Crawford in Detroit got a hit against the Red Sox and they dumped from first all the way down to third just by losing that one game because it was so tight at the top.
And you
And do you know if they had
mentioned,
ended the season tied, if they would have done a 3 game playoff to break it like they did in later years?
I don't know. See that is an interesting thing because games weren't usually made up then. And if there was rain on, because it was overcast in New York on the Monday, if there had been rain out, the Red Sox would have been declared the champions and they wouldn't have made up those extra games. So it had never had, there's only one other time that it went down to the last day of the season. And that was 1889 with Boston and New York again in the National League. And, it wasn't necessarily really a concept until, I mean, I think 1948 was the first true, like, both teams finish in a tie. It's actually an extra game versus in 1908, the year of the Merkel game, where that was actually a makeup game of a suspended game because they were tied.
Jared, you mentioned that well, the only year other than '94 there was no World Series. I think the prevailing story is that McGraw didn't want to play the American League team because he felt the American League was an inferior league. But was it really McGraw's decision, or was it Brush's, or was it both? Or
I mean, the other thing with McGraw too, McGraw had been the Baltimore manager in the AL, and he clashed really hard with Ban Johnson. So he had basically done a maneuver that because he owned stock in the team, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna go down this like rabbit hole here, but he had owned stock in the team, and he was trying to get out of there because Ban Johnson kept suspending him because that's how McGraw was, and Johnson didn't want that kind of ball in the AL. But the ownership had to buy back his stock from him. So really, it ended up somehow that John T. Brush was actually standing there to get the stock. So Brush briefly owned the Orioles. Stole McGraw came over, brought Joe McGinnity and a variety of other players with him, and so there was very bad blood between. I mean, McGraw and Johnson supposedly hated each other, so there was part of that, and so who knows what it was? There were rumors that Brush gave a financial apology to his players for because they're missing out on money by not playing that, and that he awarded them bonuses that. But I don't know if it was McGraw or if it was Brush. They both of them had very bad relationships with Ban Johnson in the AL.
Interesting. Any other questions for Jared?
Yeah, Jared,
Yeah.
question or comment and question. I brought up Jack Chesbro's page on Baseball Reference. He had a 10.6 WAR in 1904. Of course, he pitched, like you said, over 450 innings. And he still, a couple of years after that, he 5 WAR in 1905, 3.9 in '06, 5.0 in 1907, and he kind of faded from there. Is it basically considered that pitching all those innings in 1904 just burned his arm out and he's never the same after that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it looks like. I mean, in a purely baseball context, Chesbro heroically tried to drag that whole team across the finish line. And it's just like Ed Walsh was the same way in 1908 for the White Sox. Ed Walsh was really never the same after throwing like 464 innings. They both threw the spitball, whether that, guys argue whether or not the spitball actually hurts your arm or if it's like throwing a knuckleball back then. But yeah, I don't think he was ever really the same again, certainly not to those heights that he was in 1904.
Good. Thanks. That's all I got.
All right. I have a question. How do I stop sharing? Or Alex, can you just take the screen from me and pull it back? Or there's a red X. I don't know if that will if that boots me out of the meeting, I guess we'll find out. No, that didn't do it.
Okay, I think I
Okay.
took it back from me.
There we go. You got it. Thanks. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you letting me go on and on about this. So
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Happy to have you anytime to talk dead ball, and good luck in a Sabre National presentation sometime. So it'd be cool if you got to represent our chapter at the national conference. All right, is not Joe Adana ready to present?
Yep.
You want to share your screen?
Yeah, it says. Oh, okay, there we go. I think you were sharing, so it wouldn't let me. Just a sec. Okay, is that showing up?
Not yet. Might be one click
Can you
away.
guys see my screen now? Sorry?
Yeah. See something. It's not your cover slide yet, but it looks like you're trying to share your screen. Okay, there it is.
Oh, okay.
But
All right, so
Brandon, instead of sharing your whole screen, can you just share the PowerPoint presentation? If not, don't worry about it. Just this way here we're not seeing
let me check.
the window.
Can I try my sound out?
There we go.
Am I reverting?
No,
You sound
can hear
fine
you,
out
Carl.
there.
I don't know if he's ready to go. I was going to ask Jared a question. Did I hear you say you had 155,000 words?
that wasn't
that's
me.
Dan.
Damn.
Yeah, that was Dan.
Okay. So I've got about 5,000, and now I'm feeling really out of place here. So,
Brandon, we can see it good now.
Hey, Carl,
yeah, I
Whatever.
can't assume things working very well for me. Yeah,
whatever you're doing, whatever you're writing, I just fully encourage you to do it. Don't worry about the word count, or if it makes you happy and you like the rabbit hole you're diving down, go for it.
yeah. Okay, back to meeting.
All right, Brandon Smith, aka
you
not
go.
Joe Adana.
All right. You guys can, and everybody can see my screen now, or the right screen, I guess. All right. So the crux of this idea is that since Coors is so much larger than the typical field, that a team built around speed and athleticism can take advantage of that size. Also, since the park is so large, it inflates on base percentage and extra base hits, and a fast, aggressive team can force the issue by routinely taking extra bases and forcing defenders to attempt plays that they're not required to make anywhere else and can't really practice because Coors is so much larger and Denver's environment is somewhat unique. And then on defense, the same speed can be used to cover more space, convert more bad balls into outs, and limit extra bases. So the first thing I looked at is base running, and I used base running runs above average for the periods from 2002 to 2025. I'm not going to go into a lot of the methodology. It's going to be very in the weeds. And I feel like this is already kind of a lot of information. So I don't want to just overload everybody. It is based on play-by-play data. So it's probably a little bit less precise than StatCast. But since StatCast metrics are only available since 2016, it's just too small of a sample size to really do too much that's all that meaningful. So I wanted to use base running runs above average as well. It's broken down into weighted stolen bases, ultimate base running, which measures a player's opportunities to advance and how often they do that, how often they run into outs, and then how often they don't advance. And this is at the bottom here, I have the correlation figures for this period. So it's 24 seasons, and it's about 2.5 times more important to Colorado than it is to the rest of the league. So when I did run the league numbers, I took Colorado out just to make it clean and isolate it so that I'm not double counting their figures or artificially inflating the numbers for the rest of the league. And now when we look at it through base running run value, which is the StatCast metric for base running. So this period is from 2016 to 2025. And this is about 3.5 times more important to Colorado than it is to the rest of the league. So it's pretty clear that at least from this perspective, it's definitely more important, and it makes sense. There's just more opportunities to advance. The field's larger, so it's easier to have extra base hits. And also because the field's large and it increases on base percentage, you just have more opportunities to do it naturally, even not accounting for the size. Well, I guess that still accounts for the size of the field. Sorry. So going a little bit deeper, I ran a multi-regression analysis for the Rockies for 2002 to 2025. I looked at pitcher WAR, batting runs above average, base running runs above average, and fielding run value. It's basically the reason I chose these 4 things. It's the 4 components of baseball. It's pitching, hitting, base running, and defense. So I feel like it does a pretty good job of encapsulating the primary factors that go into it. For the period from 2002 to 2015, since StatCast isn't available, fielding runs above average is based on UZR. And then for 2016 to 2025, it is based on outs above average, which is StatCast. Really, aside from being based on play-by-play or StatCast, the methodology for those 2 metrics is pretty similar. But I feel like they're the 2 best metrics to use for this particular issue. So I looked at the coefficients between home win percentage or I suppose win percentage for home and away. Sorry about that. For Colorado, and just without going into all the numbers are here. Basically what this means is that for every run that the team improves from base running runs above average, the winning percentage goes up by about 1,000th of a percent. So, and then also it's somewhat weird that there's a negative correlation or a negative coefficient with base running run value and the winning percentage for away games. It's even if it's less important, it's reasonable to think that at being better at base running doesn't actually make you lose games on the road. That's not really, it seems somewhat counterintuitive. So I did use the league average away coefficient, and after all this math and you multiply each of these by 81 for 81 home games, 81 road games, comes out to just about 1/5 of a win over the course of the season for every run the team improves in base running run value. So typically in any type of modeling for like win-loss percentage, it's about 10 runs for equal about 1 win. In this case, it's a little over 5 runs to equal 1 win. So it doesn't just lead to more winning, it's actually more efficient. in the way it uses runs and converts them into wins. So that is just kind of one extra way I want to look at it and do things a little bit different than just running a straight, correlation. Moving on to fielding, if use fielding runs value, as I discussed before, 2002 to 2015 is based on UZR, and 2016 to 2025 is outs above average. This is, I just wanted to include some information about this. I think it's all something that a lot of people, if you've looked into analytics, are familiar with it. I think a lot of people are somewhat familiar with it, but I just don't want to get too down into how every metric or every stat is calculated or the methodology behind it. So looking at some fielding correlation, it correlates about 2.5 times better for Colorado, their home win percentage, than it does their away winning percentage, meaning it's about 2.5 times more important when they're at home because of the unique challenges that Coors presents. And then when I ran the similar multi-regression analysis that I mentioned earlier, it provided these coefficients as well, which comes out to about 6th to 7th win per season for every 1 run increase in fielding run value. So then going back to what I did before, where typically 10 runs equals 1 win, here it's a little over 6, which is, again, much, much more efficient than typically modeling or improving the team in other manners that aren't as efficient. Joe, I'm sorry about this. This hurt me too. I wanted to find a real world example of this, and I looked into it, looked into the size of really every ballpark. And Kauffman is the 2nd largest ballpark, and it's pretty similar to Coors in its dimensions. And they're also the last small market team to win the World Series. And they did it mainly with base running and fielding. I don't want to go through, every single data point here. I just wanted to kind of lay out, and I think you can see every season really, I guess with the exception of 2015, they weren't as good in base running, but they were also 1st in fielding that year. They were 3rd in 2014 in fielding, 2nd in 2013 in fielding, and really made up for a pretty poor offense most of the time. 25th in 13, 21st in 14, and 8th in 15, and never above average in runs, which that was one thing I found about the Rockies when I looked into it. They have been below average in batting runs every season they've existed, which is surprising. They had some what I thought were very good offensive teams earlier in their history, but apparently it was more, a handful of guys than, a full lineup or something that translated to success throughout the entire season anyway. But mainly I wanted to, the reason I looked at the Royals is to find some example of where something like this has been successful. And it was actually much more recent than I would have guessed it would. I thought I would probably have to go back farther to, not necessarily the dead ball era, but probably like the 80s to find strategies that were successful like this. But it was quite a bit more recent. And unfortunately, as a Mets fan, it was somewhat painful to relive this chapter. So next, I want to look at some of the successful Rocky seasons, which sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, but it's happened before. And here again, you can see where they've never been had a positive batting runs above average, but in maybe to a lesser extent than the Royals, they've still managed to provide additional value with their base running and fielding typically in the seasons they have been successful. Although with the fielding is lesser, so it really stands out more, I think, in the base running. And you also really see how important pitcher WAR is, which that's pretty obvious. I think that goes for everybody. So I also wanted to cover some notable Coors Park factors. Again, I just wanted to sort of paint a picture of the increase in on-base percentage, which you can see with every hit type is higher than 100, and strikeouts are cut down, which again just provides that many more opportunities to get on base and then push the envelope with stolen bases or taking extra bases. And then also you can see here that, especially with triples, Coors provides a lot more opportunities for extra base hits than most fields. So inclusion, historically, base running and fielding have been much more important to home win percentage in Colorado compared to the rest of the league. And not only does improving base running and fielding lead directly to more wins, it actually makes them more efficient in calculating runs into wins in addition to that initial effect. And as I said before, the last small market team to win a World Series plays in a stadium that's almost as large as Coors, and they were able to convert the strategy into success despite poor output in terms of batting runs above average. And they were mostly pretty average in pitching more, which is something you don't typically see with a team that's successful with this type of makeup. Usually, I feel like the base running and fielding usually comes along with good pitching, but that might just be something that is a connection that I make that isn't actually real. And then also there's a couple other notable benefits to it. I think that building a team that fields the ball well may also help the Rockies sign free agent pitchers. If you can demonstrate in the long run that, hey, our defense, our system, it does, limits the amount of hits. It actually, and as we saw with the home run park factor, 106 really isn't crazy. I feel like a lot of people have this idea that Coors is really, really inflates home runs, but it doesn't because of its size. The bigger increase in offense is due to all the additional hits it creates. And then finally, a faster, more athletic team would also help the Rockies modernize their roster and better capitalize on recent rule changes that make speed more important on offense and defense, like around the pickoff rule and also shifts. Both of those things make speed much more important, and it affects the team on both sides of the ball. But that's it. That's all I have. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything like that.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Joe?
Brandon, I really want to thank you very much for mentioning the 2015 Kansas City Royals. So
yeah, I know. They should have come with like a Surgeon General warning or something.
Winnable series. A question that I have about this research you did is how much of it is attributed to the dimensions of Coors Field versus playing at altitude. So if you were to do a similar study for the 93-94 seasons at Mile High, would you have seen comparable numbers?
And I thought about doing that. I looked into Mile High, but it's just with 2 seasons. You can't really get anything all that meaningful out of it. It's just not, especially compared to the 24 seasons at Coors, or 25 now. So I couldn't really get anything meaningful from the math. But I think it's partially the size. And then also, one thing I found is that Colorado has the fastest infield in the league. That is something that is measured in park factors as well. So you really get it everywhere. You have the reduced drag because of the elevation. It's dry, so the infield's faster. The field's bigger, so it's more surface you have to defend. And it just, I think it all kind of adds up, to what we see in like the park factors. But I did want to include more field size based analysis. I'm having a difficult time figuring out how to model that for Coors, because for every other field, the bigger it is, the worse offense is. But that's Coors. It is different than that because of its environment. It's actually better for offense, which makes it very hard it's made it hard for me anyways to figure out how to analyze, the park effects specifically for them, since it's 2 things that typically work against each other.
That's interesting.
Yes. Have you, now that you know that base running and fielding are so important, have you looked back at past Rockies and maybe through a different lens thought through who some underrated Rockies were based on them being especially good at those 2 things?
Not really. I since I'm not a Rockies fan, I didn't really think of. I looked at it more from a team standpoint. The one thing I wanted to do for past Rockies that I haven't I just ran out of time to do was look at pitchers to see what type of pitchers have been successful, especially like going back to the infield thing. If the infield is that fast and the field is so big, this seems weird to say, would fly ball pitchers actually do well in Coors Field? Is that who has typically fared better? But I ran out of time. So I'll probably still do it. I think it's still a work in progress. But
are exit velos higher at Coors than other stadiums? That might be a part of the infield being so fast.
Well, I would think it would. If nothing else, you would have still less drag. Makes some difference. Even if the ball's on the ground, it still matters. And I mean, if you have a couple thousand I suppose a couple thousand ground balls a year at Coors, give or take, I would guess. It's going to make a pretty big difference.
Aaron Cook's always been cited as a guy who fared pretty well for the Rockies relative to elsewhere, and he was a ground ball pitcher. So it's interesting to see that. I sort of thought he was always you avoid the fly ball thing, but in looking at your park factors, home runs don't hurt you that bad, and then conversely, like strikeouts seems like in free agency almost better to overpay for a power pitcher, given the rest of the park factors.
That was like one of the first things I thought with pitchers too, is do you just go pure stuff, people who can strike out, and you just limit the balls in play as much as possible. But I think that's because even as important as these things are compared to the Rories, by far, like the thing that determines success far more than anything else, at least in the research that I did. So I would like to kind of dig into that and find out if there is a sort of a pitching angle to this that might also provide some kind of insight as to the best way to do that.
Can I throw out a question? So a little book thing that I'm working on. I've been looking to see if Major League Baseball itself has rules about how stadiums are constructed. Like when you brought up the grass, my issue was one of my chapters is about all the people getting beamed with line drives over the years, and we started out with no nets anywhere, even behind home plate, and then now I think we're close to enclosing the whole field with nets to protect people, it seems like. But I've tried to find the CFML. This is for a research question. Is there some way to find out how much oversight or rules and you got to live by, or these are best practices that MLB, imposes on their teams and their ballparks? When you talk about grass, I mean, you could mow the infield like down to almost nothing, like the green on a golf course, and then grow the grass in the outfield 5 inches thick. It would totally change. Change the game. I assume that's not allowed, but
I think the Cubs used to grow their infield long, like in the '80s when they played like the Cardinals, those fast teams, and because they wanted to keep the ground balls in the infield. I want to say it might be a different team, it might be for a different time or a different reason, but I think people have done that in the past. But I really don't know if there are some type of guidelines. I'm sure if it's kind of ridiculous, they'd probably hear about it, but I'm not sure.
Well, I guess the bottom line of my question is, if anybody in Sabre were to contact MLB and say, would you provide us what rules and regulations that you guys impose on the baseball fields where the teams play? And because I think it'd be fascinating to find out. Well, Cooperstown thought there weren't any. They sort of just left it like safety rules for fans and all that. Is just it's your park, it's your problem, But that seems, I think in this day and age, it seems a little odd to me. But has anybody researched or made contact with MLB? And how'd you do it?
I have, but I know some teams have tinkered with whether the base paths slope inward or outward, and some pitchers shorter cut of grass or ask the grounds crew to water the dirt extra. The thoughts of ground ball pitchers where they want things done slightly different to favor themselves. Even how compact the mound is. There's a little bit of wiggle room there
Wow.
because it's hard to police dirt and grass from a Midtown Manhattan office. But the fences are
I
something.
wonder. I know umps. Sorry, go ahead.
I was mentioning like the Bridage barrier.
Oh, I know the umps do like a walkthrough beforehand. So I wonder if that's partly up to them, if they have some feedback, but I can't imagine they could be like, hey, mow that grass or anything. But I know they do like a walkover.
Maybe report it to the league if it's egregious or something. But like the Rockies added the Bridage barrier for some reason, and lately the Orioles have been tinkering with their fences, like greatly impacted the number of home runs out in left center and I think left out in Baltimore. I don't know like what the theory behind any of those changes were, and if the league had much say in tinkering with the field to favor the team. But those seem like relatively short-sighted things. A lot of Brendan, your research here is like how to construct a team, not how to tinker with a field based on who you got on the roster.
Yeah, it does seem like they made a lot of changes to their field, like in the last 5 years or so. And you would think, I could see if the league would want them like, hey, if you're going to make a change, keep it this way for several years, so it doesn't seem like you're changing it from season to season to, best suit your team kind of thing.
Seems like this current roster kind of is fitting into what you're saying. I mean, I don't know if anybody's measured anybody with a stopwatch, but there's some guys out there, the fastest Rockies I've ever seen, and since inception, McCarthy, and the fans love it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a more exciting brand of baseball.
Yeah.
So there's a rule on chain. I remember this from a Bill Veeck book about him trying to change the outfield fence on like a day-to-day basis. And I think the league stepped in on that.
Wow.
So you can't tinker
That sounds right. He tried a lot of stuff.
There's a very basic field dimensions primer, and I just put the link in the chat for Carl to grab, but there's no contact information. It does talk about can't mess with the walls, can't mess with the minimum 325 down the line, but it really doesn't talk about anything a groundskeeper would be involved in. Because I know for a fact that you roll a ball down the third base line in one park and you do it in another park and you're not going to get the same result. That I know.
Yeah. And it's not an accident.
Because I know teams still check it.
There was a site, it's I think Clem's Baseball Stadiums, that I used for a lot of the field sizes. That was kind of interesting. It has, I think, every Major League Baseball stadium that they've ever used on it, and it just has a ton of information about stadiums it's kind of a cool site that I never knew existed because I've just never really been looking into stadiums that much, but I thought it was pretty interesting.
Thanks. Any other questions for Brandon? Well, Brandon, thanks for presenting. That was super interesting.
A lot of great work.
Thanks.
A lot of great work.
Yeah.